What if everything you believed about your proud family was a lie? What if a single knock at the door brought with it a secret so powerful it could tear apart years of peace, pride, and unity? In Downton Abbey 3, just when the Crawley family seemed to have finally found harmony, one shocking revelation threatens to unravel it all. A man no one expected, a past no one spoke of, and a truth that could destroy everything. Downton Abbey looked more peaceful than ever. The grand estate was alive with the laughter of children, quiet whispers of staff below stairs, and the graceful footsteps of Lady Mary walking the halls with a new sense of purpose. She had taken full responsibility for the estate, and despite the challenges of modern times, she carried the family name with elegance and strength. Tom Branson, now fully accepted as both family and estate manager, stood by her side with quiet confidence. Edith, often the distant one, had returned from London with her husband and child for a special gathering. She had grown into her role as a successful editor and mother, and her presence brought warmth to the estate. The family had called everyone together to celebrate a new investment, modern expansion of the estate grounds that would create jobs and protect Downton's legacy for the future. Even the staff below stairs, though older, still carried their duties with pride. Mr. Carson moved slower now, but his eyes watched everything. Mrs. Hughes kept things organized, and Thomas Barrow had grown into a more confident head butler. The Crawley family had faced wars, death, love, betrayal, and change, but for once, things seemed to settle. Peace lived in the small details, the careful arrangement of flowers by the maids, the sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the gentle smiles exchanged over tea. Cora looked on her family with pride. Robert, older and more reflective, had begun to enjoy the comfort of watching his grandchildren run freely across the lawns. This was Downton at its best, elegant, proud, and united. The estate had survived world wars and personal tragedies. Now, it looked like it would truly stand strong for the next generation. The Crawleys had rebuilt their world, stone by stone, moment by moment. There were still the usual disagreements, Mary's stubborn views, Edith's sharp remarks, Tom's attempts to balance both sides, but nothing too serious. Even the Dowager Countess, though now gone, seemed to watch over the family through the memories she left behind, but peace, as always in Downton, was never built to last. Behind the gates, beyond the calm surface, something was coming. A whisper from the past, a shadow buried for too long. A truth so dangerous, so personal, it could shake even the firmest of bonds. The family had no idea what was about to walk into their lives, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning mist still hung over the gardens. When the car pulled up to the front of Downton Abbey, it wasn't a grand arrival, no trumpets, no fanfare. Just a quiet engine, a simple black coat, and a man with eyes that carried something heavy. He looked to be in his early 30s, not dressed like a lord, not poor either, somewhere in between. He stood still for a moment, staring at the house, as if he had seen it before, maybe in dreams or old photographs. Then he walked up the steps and knocked. Mrs. Hughes opened the door and tilted her head, slightly unsure. "May I help you?" she asked. The man nodded. "My name is James. I need to speak to Robert Crawley. It's a family matter." The request was unusual. Most guests were expected, or at least known by someone in the household. But something in his tone, calm, respectful, but certain, made her pause. She informed Lord Grantham, who was in the library, enjoying his usual tea and newspaper. Robert listened, slightly confused, but agreed to meet the visitor in private. When James stepped into the room, silence fell. He looked directly at Robert, not rudely, but with quiet intensity. "I know this is sudden," he began, "but I believe I'm your son?" Time froze. Robert blinked, lowering his cup slowly, his fingers trembling just slightly. "I beg your pardon?" James reached into his coat and handed over a small envelope. Inside were worn letters, faded photos, and one unmistakable ring engraved with the Crawley crest, the handwriting in the letters. It was his. Robert stared at the paper, then back at the man who now stood still as stone before him. The room felt colder, The story spilled out slowly. James had been raised by his mother, alone. She never spoke much about his father, only that he had been an English officer during the war, kind but called away by duty and family obligations. Only on her deathbed did she reveal the full truth. His father was a man named Robert Crawley. Earl of Grantham. Downton was the first to hear about it afterward, and she was furious. Her instinct was sharp and protective. This has to be a lie. He could have faked the letters, the ring, everything. But Robert didn't dismiss it so easily. Something in the boy's eyes and his quiet words reminded him of his younger self. Cora was shaken. She wanted to believe Robert had remained faithful all his life, but deep down, she always knew there had been gaps in the early years of their marriage, years of distance, war, and uncertainty. She held his hand that evening, silent, waiting for him to speak. Downstairs, the staff whispered. Word spread quickly, too quickly. Who was this James? Was he a threat? Was he after money, land, or just recognition? Some felt sorry for him. Others feared the disruption. Thomas raised an eyebrow, watching closely, calculating, but James didn't act like a man chasing wealth. He stayed in the small guest room, avoided large dinners, and spent time walking the gardens alone. He even helped the groundskeeper lift a fallen branch after a storm. When asked, he always gave the same answer. I just wanted to know who I came from. Still, his presence was a spark, and Downton, once calm, now sat on the edge of a fire. Mary began preparing for a possible legal challenge to the estate. Edith started digging through old army records. Robert remained quiet, caught between shame, guilt, and a strange, unexpected curiosity. The Crawleys had faced outsiders before, but this one wasn't a stranger. He might just be one of them, asterisk at first. Everyone tried to keep things civil. But Downton Abbey is not a place where secrets sleep quietly. Whispers turned into tension, meals turned cold from silence. And every corner of the estate felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. The presence of James, though polite and distant, had become a wound that no one could ignore. Mary was the first to act openly. Sharp and commanding as ever, she stood in the drawing room and said what everyone else feared to voice. If he's truly father's son, what does that mean for George? For this estate? For everything we've built? Her voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying the fear beneath her control. She had spent years preparing George to inherit, guiding him as the next Earl. The idea of another son older, with a claim, was unthinkable. Robert had no answer. He hadn't denied the possibility. And that silence was worse than any confirmation. Edith, as always, took a different approach. She had lived in the shadows of Mary all her life. She knew what it felt like to be overlooked. So she decided to investigate, but not to attack, only to understand. Through her newspaper contacts, she began tracing James's mother, uncovering hospital records, wartime letters, and a photograph showing a much younger Robert beside the woman he once knew. The evidence grew harder to ignore. Meanwhile, Tom Branson found himself in the middle. As someone who was once an outsider too, he saw something in James that others didn't. Over a quiet glass of whiskey in the library, Tom asked the question that haunted everyone. Do you want the title? James shook his head. No, I don't even want the name. I just want to know if he's really my father. But by then, the damage was done. The staff downstairs had taken sides. Some, like Mr. Mosley, defended James's right to the truth. Others, like Carson, could barely hide their disgust. An heir should be born into the name, not walk in from the street. Mrs. Hughes warned him to hold his tongue, but even she felt the confusion deep down. Cora kept her pain behind a mask of elegance, but every time she passed James in the hall, her eyes softened, and there was a quiet war inside her between hurt and empathy. One night she confronted Robert alone. Did you love her? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Robert paused, eyes wet with regret. No, but I was lonely. I was young, and it was wartime. That answer didn't heal her, but it gave her something to hold on to. James, unaware of all the conversations swirling around him, continued to live simply. He took long walks. He read in the library. And sometimes he watched the Crawley children play outside with a look of distant longing in his eyes. Then came the solicitor's letter. A formal inquiry into James's right to claim the name Crawley. It wasn't sent by James, it was sent by someone else. Rumors pointed to Mary. She denied it with cold eyes. I do what I must to protect this family. Now the family was split. Not by anger, but by fear. Fear of change, fear of shame, fear of losing control. The Crawleys, once a pillar of grace and strength, now looked like any other family, imperfect, defensive, and full of cracks, and in the heart of it all stood a man who only wanted to be seen, not as an heir, not as a threat, just as a son. It was never meant to end like this. The Crawleys had gathered many times before for dinners, crises, weddings, even funerals. But this meeting was different. No servants hovered. No tea was poured. Just the core of the family, seated in a tight circle, with James at the center of it all. His hands rested on his lap, quiet and calm, while every pair of eyes around him burned with questions, resentment, or pain. Robert was the first to speak. His voice, usually warm and full of authority, sounded older, now tired. "I cannot change the past," he said, "but I must take responsibility for it." He turned to Cora. "I failed you." She didn't cry. She simply nodded, her fingers clenched around a handkerchief she hadn't used. "You failed yourself more." Mary broke the stillness like glass. "And what about George? Are we supposed to just step aside because a ghost from the past walked in with a family ring?" Her tone was sharp, but her eyes flickered with something deeper, fear of being replaced. James stood slowly. "I never asked for a title. I never wanted Downton. I came for a name. I came because my mother died thinking I was forgotten. I just wanted to know if I mattered." His voice didn't rise, but every word landed like thunder. Silence again. Until Edith, holding a thin folder in her hands, spoke gently. "I had this investigated. His story checks out. The letters, the hospital records, it's real." She looked at Mary. "This isn't a threat. It's a truth we've avoided long enough." Tom stepped forward. "Maybe it's time we remembered that this family has survived not because of blood alone, but because we've allowed people in. I was once the chauffeur, remember?" The words hung heavy in the air. James looked at Robert, who was fighting tears behind a strained jaw. "If it helps, I'll leave. I won't speak of this again." But for once, Robert did not hesitate. He rose and walked over, placing a trembling hand on James's shoulder. "You're not a secret anymore. And you don't have to leave?" That moment broke something and rebuilt something else. Cora looked away, but she didn't object. Mary turned her face slightly, swallowing pride, maybe preparing herself to accept what she couldn't control. Edith's eyes softened. The estate didn't crumble. The world didn't end. Instead, Downton Abbey stood still, as if holding its breath, then slowly exhaled. The next morning, James left, not banished, but on his own terms. He had come for truth, and he had found it. Robert walked him to the gates. "Write to us," he said, voice hoarse. "I will," James replied, with a small, grateful smile. "I've got a name now." "That's enough." Back inside, Mary looked out the window. George ran across the lawn, unaware of the storm that had just passed. Tom joined her. "You think he'll be back?" Mary paused. "Maybe not. But he'll never be a stranger again." And with that, Downton settled again. Differently, the perfect surface had been broken. The cracks still showed. But from them grew something unexpected: humility, acceptance, and the quiet strength that only comes after facing the truth. Downton Abbey had survived war, death, and change. Now it had survived something deeper, the truth about itself. And in that it found a new kind of peace.